Silas Hart had survived
Naughty,
battlefields abroad,
naughty,
but nothing prepared him for the
bananas.
battlefield waiting at home. After 2 years away, he returned to Bozeman to find his 6-year-old twin daughters trembling in the night, their pink dresses stained, their voices no louder than a whisper. "Daddy, please help us." At their side stood Ranger, the German shepherd who never left them, his growl cutting through the silence like a warning from heaven itself. What poisoned these innocent girls? Why did their stepmother smile while they suffered? And how far would a father and his loyal dog go to uncover the truth? Stay with this story until the end, because the answer will break your heart and heal it too. Snow fell softly over Bozeman, blanketing the quiet streets as if the whole town awaited a reckoning. Silas Hart guided his truck down the narrow road. 2 years of absence pressed into the weary lines at the corners of his eyes. A soldier freshly returned from duty, he carried the kind of tire that never showed in muscles, but lived in bones. Tall, broad-shouldered, brown hair cropped short with a streak of silver, his face bore a faint scar along the jawline, an old training accident that had become part of his story. Tonight he was not a soldier, but a father, a man chasing the laughter of the daughters he had left behind. On the seat behind him sat Ranger, his German shepherd. The dog's amber eyes scanned the darkness with the focus of a sentinel. Ranger had been found shivering near a tent years ago, abandoned after his handler rotated out. Since then, he had learned Silas's moods with uncanny precision, sensing storms before they broke. Muscled, sleek, black and tan coat shining even in the dim light, he was the one constant companion during deployments, and now, on this return. Silas turned into the long driveway of the Pike Mansion, where his daughters now lived with their stepmother, Roxanne. Music leaked faintly through the windows, laughter bright but brittle. His heart expected joy, but instead the porch light revealed two small figures huddled on the top step. 6-year-old Maisie and Millie, his twins, identical yet different as dawn and dusk, curled against each other in thin pink dresses, stained and damp. Maisie, the braver one, tried to lift her chin. Millie pressed her small hands against her belly. "Daddy," Maisie whispered. "Daddy, it hurts." Millie's voice trembled like paper in the wind. Silas froze, then surged forward, scooping them into his arms. Ranger pressed close, whining low, circling their skirts with urgent sniffs. The faint, sweet smell clung to them, wrong, chemical, sugary. Without knocking, Silas carried his daughters to the truck. As he buckled them gently, his voice broke with a promise. "Daddy's home now." The truck roared towards St. Catherine's Regional Hospital, headlights carving through falling snow. Silas's chest heaved with the rhythm of someone who had sprinted for miles, but his grip never loosened. Ranger leaned against Millie's small frame, offering warmth and calm the way only a dog could. Inside the ER, antiseptic stung the air. Monitors chimed, footsteps pounded. Silas strode through the sliding doors, his daughters limp in his arms. "Severe abdominal pain, both possible ingestion," he barked, his voice clipped into soldier's cadence. A triage nurse rushed forward, and almost immediately, Dr. Eliza Monroe appeared. Dr. Monroe was in her mid-40s, tall, dark hair pulled neatly back, hazel eyes sharp with habit and compassion. Years ago, she had lost a toddler in residency to a delayed diagnosis. Since then, she carried an unshakable urgency. She swept her gaze over the twins in one heartbeat, then issued orders with calm authority. 2 IVs, tox screen, ultrasound, blood alcohol, and sedative levels. "Move quickly," Maisie whimpered, clutching a blanket. "Pink soda," she whispered faintly, as if confessing a secret. Millie's eyes fluttered shut. Ranger stiffened, nose pressed to the hem of Millie's skirt, then gave 2 short barks, the alert he had been trained to use when detecting something unusual. Eliza glanced at the dog, then at Silas. "He's trained?" "To alert," Silas said. "Then we'll listen to him," she answered, already pulling gloves to collect the clothing. The ER moved like a symphony of controlled chaos, nurses threading IVs, monitors beeping, lab tubes filling with blood. Silas stood between the 2 beds, one hand on each child, his body a bridge across their fear. Memories of deserts and gunfire collapsed into nothing, before the fragility of his daughter's pale faces. Dr. Monroe returned with the first lab results, her expression grave. Mr. Hart, the girl's blood work shows ethanol, not trace amounts, and traces of a sedative. This was not candy or food poisoning. Silas's grip on the rail tightened until his knuckles whitened. Rage swelled in him, but he forced himself to nod. He had been trained to absorb shock in silence. I am required to contact Child Protective Services and the police, Eliza said firmly. We must treat this not just as medicine, but as evidence. At that moment, Maisie stirred, her lips barely moving. Mommy Roxanne said don't tell. Said we'd ruin her party. The words sliced Silas deeper than any battlefield wound. Ranger whined, pushing his head into Silas's thigh as if grounding him. A nurse named Carly, gentle and steady, wrapped the IV site with a puppy-printed bandage. Maisie's small fingers brushed Silas's dog tags, eyes wide with fragile trust. These kept you safe, she murmured. You kept me safe, Silas whispered back. Minutes passed. Fluids began to ease the cramps. Color hinted at returning to their lips. Dr. Monroe moved between them, checking vitals, her hand on their hair as if willing strength into their small bodies. You did the right thing, Mr. Hart, she told Silas. You brought them in time. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, the ER held the weight of a new beginning, a father's return, a doctor's duty, a dog's instinct. Maisie and Millie drifted toward rest. Ranger curled protectively at their feet. Silas leaned close to both, voice quiet but steady, a vow written into the air itself. No one will hurt you again. Not while I'm here. And with that, the story's hinge turned. The battlefield had come home, but this time Silas was not alone. The snow had eased by the time Silas left St. Catherine's, but the night carried a different kind of heaviness now, one stitched from suspicion and fear. He had promised his daughters they were safe, and Ranger had settled protectively at the foot of their hospital beds. But Silas knew that promises needed proof if justice was ever to follow. He drove back toward the Pike mansion, headlights sweeping across the skeletal branches of the aspens, his jaw set with the same resolve that had once carried him through combat patrols. Tonight, the battlefield was his own home. The mansion looked less like a family's shelter and more like a stage abandoned after a performance. Balloons clung to the corners of the porch, music still pulsing faintly from within, as if Roxanne's parties left their ghosts behind. Ranger jumped down first, nose lifted, body taut with focus. The dog's every line suggested discipline, tail straight, muscles coiled, ears twitching towards scents invisible to human senses. Silas followed him inside, his boots echoing against marble floors that smelled faintly of champagne and smoke. Ranger moved through the rooms with silent determination, sniffing corners, pausing at the dining table where red cups still sat half full. Then abruptly he stiffened near the toy shelf in the twins' playroom. He nudged forward a pink velvet bag, small enough to belong to a doll. Silas crouched and opened it carefully, revealing a blue plastic straw, its tip stained faintly pink. A sweet but chemical odor lingered. He felt his throat close. Ranger growled low, eyes fixed on the object, as though naming it guilty. Silas slipped the straw into a clean evidence bag he carried from his service kit. Some instincts never left soldiers. You collect, you record, you preserve the truth. Searching further, his eyes caught the corner of a notebook tucked beneath a stuffed rabbit. He pulled it free and recognized Maisie's scrawl, childish letters pressed hard with a crayon. Between drawings of sun and balloons were words that cut him to the marrow. Pink drink. Mommy Roxanne said, "Be quiet. Don't tell Daddy." Silas closed his eyes for a moment, the paper trembling in his hand. This was not just a diary. It was a confession drawn in crayon, testimony in the voice of a child who thought secrets kept fathers safe. A sudden noise startled him, the sound of footsteps. From the hallway emerged a man in his early 40s, heavy winter coat, dark hair streaked with gray at the temples, badge clipped to his belt. Detective Marco Alvarez. Born and raised in Billings, Marco had served as a military policeman before joining local law enforcement, carrying with him both the rigidity of discipline and the weariness of someone who had seen too many domestic cases end in silence. His sharp brown eyes missed little, though his broad shoulders slumped with the fatigue of long nights. Mr. Hart, Marco said, voice steady but cautious. Dr. Monroe contacted us. I came straight here. Silas held up the bag straw and the diary. My daughters wrote this. Ranger found the straw. You'll want to see the home logs. Marco nodded, pulling a tablet from his coat. Smart home systems sync to our access. Let's check. He tapped the screen, pulling up records from the previous evening. The glowing display showed a continuous run of the house's playlist. Party mode active from 8:05 p.m. to 11:57 p.m. The exact hours Maisie and Millie's symptoms began. Matches the timeline, Marco muttered, jaw tightening. Not coincidence. He scanned the mess of glasses, bottles, and confetti scattered across the room. Too many cases like this vanish without hard proof. But this is evidence we can hold. Ranger barked once, sharp as if to underline the point. Marco crouched to scratch the shepherd's head, muttering, Smart dog. He'll make our case stronger. Before they could gather more, a knock came at the side door. Standing there was an elderly woman bundled in a wool shawl, her face pale and lined, but her eyes bright with resolve. Dolores Crane, 72, had lived next door for 40 years, widow of a firefighter who died saving a family from a blaze downtown. That loss had left her with a spine of iron and a tenderness toward children she could never quiet. I shouldn't get involved, she whispered, stepping inside, but I can't sleep knowing what I've seen. She pulled an old phone from her pocket and scrolled to a grainy video from her security camera. It showed the mansion's balcony bathed in garish light, music and laughter thundering, while two small figures, Maisie and Millie, sat huddled outside, arms wrapped around each other against the cold. The camera shook faintly as Dolores's voice from that night muttered in the background. Poor dears, they should be inside. Silas's throat burned. Marco looked grim. Mrs. Crane, this footage is critical. It shows neglect during the party. She nodded, voice trembling. Your girls deserve someone who listens. I wasn't brave enough years ago when my neighbor's child suffered under her stepfather. I'll not make that mistake twice. Silas placed a hand over hers. You've done more than enough. Thank you. Dolores looked at Ranger, who had sat loyally at Silas's side, his head cocked as if understanding. That dog, she said softly. He has the eyes of someone who already knows the truth. Marco collected the video, the logs, the diary, and the straw. We have enough to escalate. Tonight we build the case. Tomorrow we confront Roxanne. His eyes flicked to Silas. And you stay close to your daughters. They'll need their father more than ever. Silas nodded, determination hardening. Outside, the snow had begun again, falling silent but relentless. Inside, proof had taken shape. A crayon confession, a poisoned straw, a playlist that played through children's pain, and the courage of a neighbor who refused silence. This was no longer suspicion, it was evidence, and the war had come home. The evidence Silas and Detective Marco Alvarez carried weighed heavier than any rucksack Silas had ever shouldered. By dawn, the hospital called to say Maisie and Millie were stable enough to rest under watch. Silas kissed their foreheads, whispered promises, and left Ranger to guard the room for a short while. The shepherd lay coiled at the foot of the hospital bed, eyes sharp and body taut, refusing sleep. Only then did Silas return to the mansion to face the woman who had worn a mask too long. The Pike mansion, stripped of its glitter from the night before, looked hollow in the pale morning light. Champagne flutes littered the counters, the air still carrying a cloying perfume. Roxanne Pike descended the staircase with a silk robe wrapped loosely around her tall, angular frame. At 32, with blonde hair pinned in waves and makeup smudged from the remnants of last night's indulgence, she looked more like an actress caught after curtain call than a stepmother. Her beauty was brittle, a gleam chipped at the edges, the kind that attracted cameras but not children. Her eyes landed on Silas and she smirked as though nothing had happened. So the hero returns, she said, voice lacquered with mockery. You look tired. The girls probably just ate too much candy. Children exaggerate. Silas stood firm, shoulders squared, holding the evidence bags in one hand. Stop pretending. I found this, he said, laying the blue straw and Maisie's diary on the table. You told them to be quiet. They were poisoned. Roxanne's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she straightened, arms crossed. They're clever little actresses, Silas, always desperate for attention. You think they wouldn't twist a tummy ache into a tragedy just to win your sympathy after you abandoned them for 2 years? Her tone was sharp, barbed with cruelty. Marco Alvarez stepped from the shadows of the hallway, his badge glinting, expression ironclad. We've got smart home logs proving your party ran for hours, right through the time those children fell ill. That isn't coincidence. Roxanne's facade cracked further, her lips pressing into a thin line. She opened her mouth to retort, but at that moment Silas's phone vibrated. He checked it. An anonymous email. The sender's name read Tessa Quinn. Tessa had once been Roxanne's closest confidant, a woman in her late 20s, with auburn hair and a nervous smile, a partygoer who lived too long in someone else's shadow. She had grown up in a family crushed by addiction, swearing she would never repeat those mistakes. But Roxanne's glittering world had drawn her in. The guilt had festered. Now perhaps it had driven her to confession. Silas opened the attachment. The audio hissed before a voice filled the room. Roxanne's unmistakable. Just give them a little so they sleep. They won't bother us. He doesn't need to know. The words cut through the silence like glass breaking. Marco's eyes narrowed. Silas's chest heaved, though his face remained carved from stone. Roxanne's face blanched, then hardened into fury. That could be anyone, she snapped, her voice rising. Tessa hates me. She'd do anything to ruin me. But Silas had seen soldiers lie under interrogation, and he knew the flicker in her eyes was not indignation, but fear. Meanwhile, Ranger padded back in from the yard, muzzle dusted with dirt. He barked once, then dropped something at Silas's boots, a crumpled tissue, stained faintly pink, the same sweet chemical odor lingering. The shepherd sat back on his haunches, tail thumping once, as if presenting evidence to a tribunal. Marco bent to bag the tissue, murmuring, "Even the dog knows your secrets." Roxanne's mask slipped completely. She no longer smiled or smirked, only hissed like someone cornered. You think you're a saint, Silas? You were gone while I held this house together. You don't know what it's like to deal with those needy brats night after night. Her words spat venom across the marble floor. Silas's voice, low but steady, carried the weight of both a father and a soldier. They are my daughters. They are children. And they are not yours to break for the first time, Roxanne faltered, stepping back a pace. Her robe slid slightly off her shoulder, and in that unguarded moment she looked less like the glamorous woman she pretended to be, and more like the fragile shell of someone hollowed out by selfishness. Marco recorded every word, his body tense but professional. We'll take this further, he said quietly. Mr. Hart, keep your daughter safe. This house is no longer her shield. As they left, Ranger lingered at the doorway, gaze fixed on Roxanne with the cold judgment only animals can give. She glared back, but the mask was gone. For once, silence said more than her excuses. The battle had shifted. The evidence was building into an avalanche, and the mask that once dazzled society had finally fallen. The winter sun climbed slowly over the mountains, its pale light spilling across Bozeman like a cautious blessing. For Silas, the day began not with relief, but with a steady march into another kind of battle, the legal fight for his daughter's safety. The evidence gathered overnight had been delivered to the lab, and now the phone call came swift and sharp. Forensic confirmation. The fingerprints on the blue straw in the plastic cup belonged to Roxanne Pike. There was no denying it. Silas stood outside the courthouse annex of Gallatin County, his broad shoulders squared, the scar on his jawline stark against the cold morning air. In uniform, he had faced warlords and insurgents. Today, in his civilian coat, he faced a system that could either shield his daughters or fail them. Ranger sat at his side, leash looped loosely in Silas's grip. The dog's breath smoked in the frosty air, ears pricked forward, every inch the vigilant guardian. Inside, the emergency hearing room was small but charged with gravity. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale sheen across the long wooden table. At one end sat Silas, Detective Marco Alvarez, and Dr. Eliza Monroe. Eliza's professional poise was softened by the quiet compassion in her hazel eyes, a woman who had carried too many children through storms. Marco leaned back slightly in his chair, dark hair combed neatly, his notepad already half filled with observations, his discipline evident in every stroke of his pen. Across the table, Roxanne Pike entered, flanked by a lawyer in an expensive suit. Her blonde hair was pinned into an immaculate bun, her silk blouse pristine, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion and fury. She sat with her arms crossed, the picture of brittle defiance. Whispers rippled through the small audience, local reporters, CPS staff, and a few members of Bozeman's close-knit community. At the center of it all sat Karen Lewis, a woman in her late 40s who served as the CPS case officer. With auburn hair streaked by gray, glasses perched low on her nose, and the calm voice of someone who had weathered countless storms, she radiated both authority and maternal steadiness. Years earlier, Karen had grown up as the eldest of 5 children in a struggling family, forced to protect her siblings from neglect. That history shaped her resolve. No child under her watch would ever be voiceless. Karen tapped her pen against the folder before her. We have reviewed the forensic analysis. The items presented: the straw and the cup carry Roxanne Pike's fingerprints. The toxicology results confirm ethanol and sedative traces in the children's systems. Given the evidence and the corroborating testimony, this is no longer a matter of conjecture. It is fact. Roxanne's lawyer raised a hand. My client maintains these were accidents. Perhaps other party guests ... Karen's gaze cut him short. The responsibility falls on the guardian. And the statements of both Maisie and Millie align with the evidence. This is child endangerment. Silas's hands clenched against the table. He looked at Karen not as a soldier, but as a father who had fought too long to be heard. All I ask is to protect my girls. They have been through enough. At that moment, the side door opened. Maisie and Millie entered with a CPS counselor, each clutching one of Ranger's ears like small anchors. The counselor, a young man named Ethan Price in his late 20s, carried himself with gentle humor, short curly hair, a warm smile, and an ease that came from years of working with children who had forgotten how to laugh. He had grown up in foster care himself, shuttled from home to home, and had vowed to become the steady figure he never had. The girls sat quietly beside Silas, Ranger lying between them, his great head resting on Millie's knee. The shepherd's presence filled the room with an unspoken testimony of loyalty. Ethan crouched to their level, whispering encouragement before addressing Karen. Part of therapy for the children involves consistent companionship. Ranger has shown natural ability to soothe them. He reacts when they tremble, stays close when they withdraw. He is in every way their therapy dog. Karen noted this, her expression softening as she observed the girls stroking Ranger's fur, their small hands steadying against his warmth. Then he will remain a part of their care plan, she said firmly. The decision came swiftly after. Karen closed the file, her voice carrying across the room. Effective immediately, Roxanne Pike is stripped of temporary guardianship, and a no-contact order is issued. Custody returns to their biological father, Silas Hart, who is granted full protective authority. Roxanne's composure cracked. Her lawyer tried to steady her, but whispers from the audience grew into a low buzz. Some were neighbors, others parents, all recognizing that the glittering woman once paraded at galas was now exposed. Her name, once linked with prestige, was sinking under the weight of shame. Silas exhaled, a sound that carried 2 years of absence and 1 night of horror. He drew his daughters into his arms, Ranger pressing close, and for the first time since his return, he felt the ground beneath him was steady. Outside the courthouse, members of the local church group waited, offering warm embraces and words of solidarity. A neighbor brought blankets for the twins, another left a basket of food. Roxanne had been part of their social circles, but now doors that once opened for her would remain shut. Justice was not only legal, but communal, the small town rallying to protect its own. As the day waned, Silas stood with Maisie and Millie beneath the courthouse steps. Ranger barked once, a deep, resonant sound that echoed against the stone. It was as if the dog declared victory not of vengeance, but of survival. For Silas, the battle for his daughters was far from over, But tonight, justice had begun its work, and for two small hearts, the world had just become safer. The courthouse had closed its doors behind them, but the echo of justice still clung to Silas as he steered the truck north, away from the weight of marble and whispers, toward the solace of the mountains. Bridger Range rose sharp against the horizon, its peaks dusted with snow like watchmen in white. Here on the edge of timber and sky, Silas had kept a cabin since before deployment, a place built from pine beams and quiet labor, never meant for grandeur, but for refuge. Tonight it was no longer just his retreat, it was home for three. Maisie and Millie leaned against each other in the back seat, pink coats buttoned tight, exhaustion softening their faces. Their small voices occasionally rose with a question. "Daddy, will we have pancakes?" Then fell into murmurs of sleep. Ranger, wedged between them, kept his amber eyes half open, the heavy head resting across Millie's lap, body humming with vigilance even in stillness. He had become their silent sentry, as if the oath Silas spoke had somehow passed into him as well. The cabin waited at the tree line, its chimney puffing faint curls of smoke from a fire Marco had lit earlier that day in quiet solidarity. Marco hadn't stayed. His work pulled him back to the city, but the gesture spoke volumes about the man. Silas parked, lifted the twins gently, and carried them inside. The cabin smelled of cedar, firewood, and cinnamon, the simple fragrance of safety. Morning came with thin winter light spilling across the wooden floorboards. Silas rose early, boots crunching across the frost as he prepared a small hole in the backyard earth, soil dark and cold beneath his hands. By the time the girls tumbled outside in knit hats and mismatched mittens, he had already placed a young aspen beside the hole. Its sapling trunk was slender, trembling slightly in the breeze, but the leaves, though few, shimmered defiantly green. "This tree," Silas said, his voice low but steady, "will grow strong because we will take care of it. Just like I'll take care of you." Maisie knelt in the snow, scooping a handful of soil, her freckled cheek red with cold. Millie followed, her mittened hands small against the earth. Together they patted the soil around the roots, their giggles rising as clumps stuck to their clothes. Ranger circled once, then lay down at the edge of the patch, nose on his paws, ears flicking, guardian even in repose. Silas pressed the final mound of earth into place, then set his hand on the sapling. "From now on," he murmured, "nothing will come between us. Not distance, not lies, not fear." The girls echoed him, their voices high and earnest. "Nothing will come between us." Later, inside, warmth spread through the cabin as Silas flipped pancakes on the old skillet, drizzling syrup into silly shapes. Maisie shrieked with laughter when he drew a lopsided smiley face, and Millie clapped as if it were a masterpiece. These small rituals, flour-dusted counters, Ranger waiting patiently for scraps, two little girls giggling, were worth more than medals or riches. They were the kind of victories no one could pin to a uniform, but only to a heart. When evening returned, the girls curled beneath quilts on the loft bed, Ranger settling into the floorboards beside them. His chest rose and fell in slow rhythm, each breath a promise of watchfulness. Maisie reached down to stroke his fur before sleep claimed her, whispering, "Good night, Ranger, our night." Millie echoed softly, "Our night." Silas lingered at the doorway, candlelight flickering across his face, the scar at his jaw catching gold. He had fought wars overseas, but this watching his daughters sleep safe, their dog curled like a sentinel, felt like the true triumph. He stepped outside into the cold, breath pluming, eyes lifting toward the aspen sapling swaying gently in the yard. Under the moonlight it looked fragile, yet he knew its roots were already reaching deep, just as love had sunk roots back into their lives. He whispered into the night, not for anyone to hear, but for the mountains to carry. "We'll take care of it together. We'll grow strong. We'll heal." And for the first time in years, laughter, not silence, promised to be the soundtrack of their home. In the end, Silas did not win through anger or revenge, but through the quiet strength of a father's love, the loyalty of a dog, and the resilience of two little girls who refused to be broken. The aspen tree they planted stood as a living reminder that even from the darkest winters, new life can rise if tended with care. This story is not only about justice, but about listening to the small voices around us, especially the ones too easily overlooked. Children do not always cry loudly. Sometimes their whispers carry the heaviest truth, and every whisper deserves to be heard, protected, and answered with love. What about you? Have you ever seen a moment when a child's voice was ignored, but should have been heard? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know how this story touched your heart. If this story moved you, please like the video, follow for more, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of hope, courage, and the unbreakable bond between humans and the animals who walk beside us.